But we wanted to do things differently because I think, especially with multicultural marketing, one thing I've always found was that most of the work that brands did was very old and traditional. It wasn't for me, it was for my aunties and uncles.
Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today I am joined by Serhat Ekinci. Now, Serhat is the Managing Director of Unite at Omnicom Media Group UK. He has extensive background when it comes to the world of creative, digital, media and advertising. And he also has a number of different portfolio hats as well, including Media for All, or MEFA, and he's also a non-executive member of the board of directors for 14 Consulting. Welcome to the show, Serhat.
Hello, welcome. Hi everyone. Hi Leila.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us. And I wonder whether we could kickstart today by handing across yourself to talk a little bit about how you came to be where you are today and some of the work that you're doing. So I know the early days for you were accounting and finance, yet you also have this rich cultural background that seems, from everything I see, populate into a lot of the work that you're doing and many of your passion projects. So I wonder how did that journey go, and how did you get to where you are now?
Well, I'll go sort of to my earlier years, as in I was born and bred in Istanbul to a Turkish and Kurdish family, and I grew up during times where we were not legally allowed to speak our language or practice our religion. So sort of inclusion has always been at the heart of everything I think of in that sense. And I would say I was in a very sort of underprivileged area in the sense that, I started working when I was 9. So initially selling water in the market, polishing shoes, to being a mechanic later. And one of those kids that always worked at weekends or summer times. Nothing by force, but I just wanted to as well to help out my family. Then I decided to come to the UK to learn English at a later stage. So I came here sort of with no English in 2006. Then I've learned English and I was working in various places, sort of mini cabs. Then I was a chef at a coffee shop at some point where I really learned my English, I would say. Then, I decided to study accounting. I've always been good with numbers. But I guess in a stereotypical way, it was also to make my mum happy. Stereotypically, she would consider sort of accounting, engineering, or being a doctor is a quote proper job. So I did accounting. I became a part qualified chartered accountant. Then I did a little bit of an internship at a treasury company. But I just didn't like it. I thought it wasn't me. Then I ended up getting a job at a media company as a consultant because I previously, which I've sort of missed in Turkey, used to work for a market research company as well. From there was a sort of PR and analysis. Then I worked with various agencies. Then I went back to Istanbul because I was homesick. Then realized I've become more of a Londoner than Turkish in that sense. But one thing that's always hit me was around how we work or respond briefs in media, advertising and marketing as a whole, that, you know, we slice and dice audiences by age, gender, socioeconomic status sometimes as well, or regionality, but we never look at things like ethnicity, sexuality, disability, religion. And I guess that those things also came a lot more apparent to me because I'm mixed myself. Then my partner, my wife, we are originally from Singapore, but spent sort of, you know, third of her life there, third in America and third here. And ethnically, she's a lot more diverse than I am in that sense. She's Indian, Portuguese, Chinese, Malay. So it's quite a diverse background. And in media in particular, or even advertising as a whole, it's all about getting into people's lives, right? Like reaching people at the right time with the right content in the right environment. And one of the things I've realized when we do respond to briefs, we don't think about those stuff, as in, you know, I might go into my in-laws and they might be watching a TV channel that I've never seen on any media plans. Or I might be going to my aunties and they listen to things or radio channels or podcasts or whatever it is that's never been discussed. So it's almost like I always felt the work that I was asked to do, I did, never represented myself at all, or most of the people around me. And yeah, in 2016, there was an opportunity to join OMG. OMG is Multicultural Consultancy, which was set up in 2009. It was just, by then, me and still our head of media, Josh. But we wanted to do things differently because I think, especially with multicultural marketing, one thing I've always found was that most of the work that brands did was very old and traditional. You know, it wasn't for me, it was for my aunties and uncles. And we wanted to change the fact that we didn't want to wait for a brief to mention an ethnicity as such, or have a specific products, because we do eat, consume every product in a nutshell. So we wanted to look at briefs with what we call cultural lenses. So consciously look at briefs to see what it means for people of certain ethnicities, religions, and sexualities. In some briefs, there are no differences. And in some briefs, there are many differences where the product is very, very relevant. So yes, since then, the team, well, it's now an agency itself. There are 15 plus of us, and we have worked with 50 plus brands and won 8 awards in the last 5 years. And here I am. So I'm much more happy because I'm happy with what we do, what I do a lot more, because I do feel it represents me as a person. And it does good by investing in businesses owned by marginalized communities as well. That was a long-winded one, wasn't it, Leila?
Might have been long-winded, but every single piece was fascinating because not only have you kindly shared a lot about your rich cultural heritage and those early days. I mean, working at 9 years old, that is, you know, that's pretty unique in and to itself. I thought me working at 14 was pretty young, but 9 is incredible. But what's interesting is you've gone along this almost serendipitous path, you know, accountancy, finance, through to your own background, which I was nodding along there because, you know, you talk of your wife. I know you have 2 multicultural children. My husband and I represent a mixture of different cultures. He's well, I say middle-aged, he would dispute that. I say middle-aged, he's a white guy, but he's American, and he arguably is more diverse and Chinese than I am, even though he's American and he's Greek. I was adopted by white British parents who are wonderful, but I can't speak, sadly, any Mandarin. So he's the one that comes straight out with that if we're ever in a Chinese restaurant. I can't understand a word of what they say. So listening to your discussion around, not only what multicultural marketing means to so many of us from different communities who identify in such different ways, hearing that the lived experience there with your wife, the experiences that you've had coming to the UK, going back to your home country, market research, it almost feels like this is exactly where you were meant to be in your career and in your life to date. And how brilliant that you are able to support and send the lift back down to such incredibly important, diverse organizations who represent society ultimately.
Yeah. No, but I think it's weird, right? Even when I came here, it was one of the things I also found in every organization, the DNI or DEI, it's not new. Everyone always talks about it or has been talking about it for a long time. But I think it's always been about people and culture, which is very important. But I think what I felt was, regardless of how inclusive the work environment is, if you're asking me to do work that I don't believe represents me when I'm part of the audience group, I think that's wrong, right? And it's especially media marketing, everyone is relevant. Yes, it might change brand to brand, but in most cases, every agency has a FMCG client, and FMCG is, mostly consumed by everyone. And I just felt, how do you expect people to feel included or belong when the work you ask them to do, whether it's the content or the media, doesn't represent them? It's a bit like, all the names I've seen on audience profiles, on presentations, it's always John's and Sarah's as such. It's never or even the pictures that they put to define who their target audience is. It's never you. And that's something we do at Unite. We change that perception and what we call, moving clients from unconscious exclusion to conscious inclusion, to make sure that everything they do, from strategy and insight to content creation to execution of media, whether it's planning or buying, is inclusive and considers differences that comes with being a different from your background in a way, right? Like you said, I think it's quite a good in point. It's a bit like in the eyes of brands. Even when I used to talk to supermarkets, I'm Turkish. They think I eat kebab all day long, but in reality, I think British people eat more kebab than I do. And that sort of stereotyping of perception of things, I wanted to change, and I like it. We're not changing the world as such, but every little helps in that sense.
It does indeed, and I particularly like that you're talking about conscious inclusion, because I hear so much about unconscious bias, and it's all very well and good. I dare say I'm going to sound a little bit drained here, but unconscious bias, it's all very well and good, but we all have that bias. We have that innate bias, and that's fine. I think the vast majority of us know this by now, but being consciously inclusive all of the time is what we need to allow people to truly feel they belong. And to your point, it is great for business because engagement goes so deep externally in the products we buy, the brands that we support, as well as it does internally with talent that we are starting to now glean and require even more so now than ever before, given that it is arguably the great retention period where talent is far more picky about where it goes to work than it ever perhaps used to be. The whole thing is flipped on its head, and so being consciously inclusive is absolutely key. Now, I know that you're passionate about many different areas, ethnic diversity, clearly socioeconomic diversity, intersectionality is one of my very favourite subjects, because for us it's about looking at that amalgamation of visible and invisible differences and diversities. But talk to me a little bit about some of your thoughts around the evolution that you have watched research, marketing, media go on over these last years, and where you see it being headed.
It's changing massively, and I think there are a few factors, and the two key things I found was COVID, as in people being stuck at home, so emotionally very connected in that sense, and the George Floyd incident. By that I mean, so we even have a joke in my team. So when I moved to the multicultural consultancy, my friends or colleagues in the network called me crazy because I left a massive team to join a tiny team, and multicultural marketing doesn't really have a good reputation in the agency sector. It's seen as old, traditional, dying, not very fun work. But in the beginning, it was very difficult because you go to brands to tell them you're doing things, you need to do things differently. And a lot of, a bit like, you talked about unconscious bias, right? It's a thing that's been built into you for years and years, whether it's through the media or behavior and people around you. You can't just get one training and, think of it as some sort of magic pill that's just going to remove your bias. You have to consciously challenge them. So in the beginning, I used to call out, so when I look back, I have an analogy of we used to be beggars in the beginning because we would knock on brands' doors and ask them, show them even stats and things and how relevant this audience is, and you're not really reaching them or not at the same frequency or not with the right content. They wouldn't want to do it. Or some would want to do it, but some would still be, nah, stop, I'm not interested. Whereas now I call ourselves choosers. And I think that the dividing point was around both within Unite, because last 6 years we've grown massively, not just, so it wasn't a growth of, because of George Floyd, COVID as such, which did help massively because it just, everyone now thinks about it. But we've gone from being what I call beggars to choosers. So we choose what brands we want to work with now as well. And it's a lot easier to have conversations with clients or even agencies that around making their work more inclusive. And a lot of agencies, whether it's on the market research side, they consciously, let's say on the market research side, I worked on it. And one of the very interesting thing I found was, there's a terminology of nationally representative. And nationally representative means by usually age, gender, location, regionality. But that means you could do a market research piece that may not have anyone of color, people of color in it at all, or they may not have anyone that is from an LGBTQ plus background or disabled, right? This is how biased it is. Like, you could technically have a research piece where all the opinions are based on a certain majority of a society versus including those marginalized communities. But it is changing, and I think not only agencies are trying, clients are trying to do, so they consciously ask about it. But I think the biggest challenge is always that there are so many teams, right, in any given company, and so many divisions, individual teams, individual account teams or specialism. And when you don't have a representation in each and individual team, there's always hiccups, as in you can never get it 100% right. And I don't ever think we'll ever get it 100% right from a inclusion perspective, because there's so many facets, like you guys are experts in this, that there's always going to be work to do, and you just consciously, you need to keep doing. But I think I would say it's in the positive direction. It's getting better. There is more interest. People think about it a lot more. They try not to ignore it. And I think, it's also the right thing to do for both commercial reasons and for moral reasons as well. And I think it's picking up, it's changing, even recruitment-wise. Obviously, we work in advertising. IPA, Institute of Practitioners of Advertisers, did a census. So the number of people of color in the sector is increased massively. There are pay gap issues. That's another subject to talk about. But you see a lot more talent coming into it. And I think if you have more diversity across all levels in an organization, you'll naturally have more people thinking differently and challenging the way we do things, even if it's a norm. Yeah, it is getting better. I am normally a very skeptical person, but I'm very positive on this subject. I would say it's getting better. We're not there yet, but it's getting much, much better.
Love the way that you reaffirm that you are positive about the future. Likewise, I am. And I think those who have lived, breathed, slept diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, all of these things for so many years, it is easy to fall into that trap of, oh my goodness, things are never going to change. They are going at a snail's pace. And, there's that incredible amount of persistence required in order to keep on moving the dial in the right direction. But there's so many different pistons going up and down. To your point, there's the internal, there's the external, there's the pay gap initiatives, there's the certain areas that relate to HR, there's supply chain, media, buying, etc. And then of course, how representative are we when it comes to our external presence and brands and such. But as ever, I know it's an overused phrase, but there never is the one silver bullet situation. There is this evolutionary process which you've described throughout the course of this podcast. It makes moral sense indeed, but commercially, these doors are starting to swing open like never before. And so it's utilizing, to your point, that positive momentum to keep on doing the right thing truly, as opposed to just having something on the screen for the sake of it, actually representing that internally within our organizations and employees, but also in terms of the customers we serve. And one of the points that you mentioned made me think a lot about the societal aspects of ESG that of course we're seeing now in terms of investment from many bodies and governments are paying attention, which is superb. It's and I'm sure from your market research background, you're thinking, right, well, it's about the hearts and the minds of advertising and media, because if we don't have that, then we don't have, the things that really motivate us to want to do more. Yet at the same time, it's also pushing the boundaries on the numbers as well. What gets measured gets managed. We have to keep on driving that. And I'm sure that there's a lot of work that you do around kind of audience insights, and ultimately, all of the different communities, they've got spending power as well.
And I think that feature, one thing that people forget as well, that potentially I'm talking more from a UK perspective as well. If you talk to any brands, usually cities are key, right? But then you think about London, 40% people of color, and if you add the other white, which could be Polish, which has the biggest language barrier in across all different ethnicities, that goes up to 55%. Birmingham, Manchester. But I think the key bit that people forget, a lot of these stats are based on 2011 census, which is 11 years old, right? And if you look at 2001 and 11, 80% of the population growth came from ethnic minorities, and it's still going up, as in, Muhammad collectively, spelling-wise, has been the most common newborn boy's name for the last few years. So that gives you some sort of reassurance. And age-wise, they're a lot younger. But I think the key will be, and the census will come out into, I think will start coming out in a few months, in July and onwards. They were very young. Like when you look at the age of let's say ethnic diversity as an example, the younger population are a lot more diverse in that sense. But they're now coming into the purchasing power. So, you know, when you talk about 18 to 45, the key groups that most brands go after, again, it will differ from brand to brand. I don't want to group people, but they'll be a lot more diverse now. They are not one or two, they're not babies anymore. They're coming into power. And that's relevant not just for brands, for companies as well, because that's your workforce, majority of your workforce. And if you don't do anything about it, you'll lose in the long term. It's full stop.
Like a disorder that we don't quite want, this oh, you've got the disease of BAME or something. It's like, well, you know, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, within which there are so many rich cultures as well. Yeah. What would your children identify as, given there's so many mixed identities within there? And my husband and I, when we have our first, it makes me wonder how they will choose to identify. It's I know culture is one of your favorite subjects, but it's like culture, diversity, isn't it? It's living, it's breathing, it's sleeping. It's a constantly evolving cycle and continuum that we are in, and I find it so incredibly fascinating.
Because it's also well, that's one of the reasons why I sort of love my job, because I thought I was like, I've always been a minority, you know, even where I was born and bred, I was a minority in that sense. And I look at my kids, I'm like, you know, we have a joke with my wife. We had lost citizens, as in global citizens. You know, we have identity crisis here and there because we don't know where we fully belong and what we are in that way. And imagine my sons, how they will feel when they grow up a bit more. And I think at least, you know, it's like what we do helps change things, and it makes me feel good about it. But yeah, it's the cultural element in particular is quite interesting, because you have like code switching and stuff. I think you've heard it anyways. It's like where one thing that this role helped me is around that, where previously, because I've learned my English in Tottenham, so it's not your Queen's English, and I've learned it in the last 15 years, so it's not that long. And when I went to work, you know, I would try to be a certain person, but then when I'm at home, I would be very different, or when I'm around my friends, because you just act differently. And I think it's like even with my Chinese side, as an example, when I go to my wife's Chinese side, I'm very quiet, because I know like there's certain cultural things, right? If you're loud, then you're immature and stuff like that. But then if you go to my side, I would say we're more hot-blooded, like Middle Eastern, and we're very loud. And you know, first time my wife met them, she was like, "Are they fighting? No, are you fighting?" I was like, "No, we're just having a chat." But I mean, it's beautiful, isn't it? I find it amazing that, you know, even at workplaces, we don't have people so much cultural diversity. It's getting better again, but you know, it's a bit like you want to go into their places and eat their food and have your holiday there, but you don't want them around you. You learn the most when, I don't know. I always find it amazing that we don't have people as much diversity in places, because it's the best thing in the world, isn't it?
Stepping away here, when you give the example of the Chinese and being quiet, and many of what we would know as quote unquote stereotypes are often, have often come from a place of culture. But then the hot-blooded side, you say, then, oh, no, we're just having a conversation. It makes me giggle because I often tell this story, is that when we got married, my husband, who's American Greek, I say, have you ever seen the film My Big Fat Greek Wedding? It's kind of, it's like that on steroids. It's that they are brilliant, but so so loud.
We are similar, yeah. Same people. I mean, don't tell your husband; he might get upset. But although Greeks and Turks, they have history. We're very similar people. But yeah, it's like the weddings, right? It's like a British wedding with people versus when we have it, all Greeks or Turks, and like hundreds of people, and it just goes. Sometimes it goes on days, isn't it?
Absolutely. The running joke, and hopefully I'm not listening to this afterwards. is he's called Costa, but you and our son will be called Peter, actually, which is lovely and wonderful. But the vast majority of the family are Peter, Costa, or Nick. So you've got a good chance that when you say one, that a third of them will turn around. And for me, I often feel, hey, I wish I knew more about the Chinese culture, and it's something that truly I, for many years struggled with. Am I Chinese? Am I, I am British. I feel and behave and observe many different things. Yet being in the Chinese community, I again don't feel I fit in enough there. But it's fascinating seeing, especially given everything that happened with Asian hate. I interviewed a number of people. I've made it a personal mission to find out more about the deepness of the beautiful kind of Chinese and East Asian culture. And often there is, to your point, this is not a community that always necessarily does speak out at all. Again, looking at the British culture, you speak to my mum and dad, and we always learn around the dinner table, oh, you never talk about politics, you never talk about religion, those are two no-nos. Yet now I'm like, no, this is good for us to talk about, because there's so much rich difference there. To your point, it's like this, it's tapestry of far more complex things than meets the eye.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so like my wife gets it a lot. Like if you ask her where she's from, she'll say if she's from London. To your point, it's like I'm majority Kurdish, but I can't speak Kurdish. And if you ask her, I'm more Turkish because I was born and raised there. And London is my home. That's how I would define myself. And because I guess I grew up in two places basically, it's London and Istanbul in literally the same place. Whereas my wife, she traveled she traveled around quite a bit. So she's always like, she doesn't know where she belongs in that sense. But yeah, she does get a lot of stereotypical stuff. Even I think in Istanbul, she got really the usual "where are you from" thing. So I'm from London, but where are you from? But I think it's just putting people into boxes. Well, even with quietness, as in, it's just it's a respectful thing versus someone being quiet. Like they may not be quiet. It's like the way I was raised, it's like you can't even, in some place, I mean, you can now, it's changing culture-wise, but you couldn't sit cross-legged in front of elderly. That's rude. That's considered rude, or you can't sit cross-legged. I quite like that. It's more respectful to elderly, but at the same time, like openness, or even in Turkey, for instance, around sex education and things, we don't talk about it, or a lot of things. It's just a cultural norms that's built, or being direct, for instance. I think that's the one I would say I struggle the most at work here. I'm just very direct, and I think it's a very cultural thing, especially in my culture. It's very black or white. We don't do grey. And whereas here, it's like, in the beginning when I moved here and started working in offices, one of the interesting facts was people You know, people, someone said something wrong, but no one would raise it, and I find it amazing. I was like, why? Or they wouldn't say it in a direct way. It was just like a even learning the language was quite a fascinating process, because things like interesting doesn't really mean interesting, but it means interesting in my language. Like getting that all nice doesn't mean nice, but it's like even to this day I haven't cracked it, and I do use these words, but I don't think I mean it in the same way. When I say something is interesting, I actually mean that it's interesting. But yeah, those thoughts are, sorry, I'm going in all directions, but it's just my brain goes into many places when you mention this stuff. Yeah.
Well, therapists are exactly the same, because I realise that we're running out of time significantly, but I would love to talk more about cultural nuances, and I'm trying to hold myself back from saying, oh, I've got a great example of that, and a great example of that. It's the power of conversation, isn't it? There was, and last thing I will say, and I'll ask you a lightning round question actually before we finish off. But on the interesting quote unquote side, there was a meme. I can't remember where it was going around. I think it might have been British v American. What interesting means, and the little bubble for the English, guy or girl saying, yes, interesting, meaning I definitely won't be doing that thing, or American thinking, interesting, they're so keen, this is definitely another meeting, it's in the bag, it's great. So it's kind of, it's like the cultural differences, it does make me laugh, but it also it makes you think, actually, is the universal language of communication a great sense of humor, where you and I are sharing a chuckle and a joke, and it breaks down so many barriers, in particular in a world of diversity and inclusion where there's a lot of fear. I do believe at the moment in fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of saying the right thing. Oh my goodness, language has changed now. What will such and such think of me? It's challenging. So wherever we can connect on that human to human basis and know that actually we are all flesh and blood at the end of the day, and we can share a rich sense of humor with one another, it helps support the future sustainability, I believe, of our workforces and society.
Yeah, I think you've got to have a little bit of a human aspect, right? And I think we need to speak up, as in because if you're not sure about, like, we did like a Ramadan newsletter, right? A colleague of mine emailed, as in, I'm also a sponsor for MG Multicultural, which is our internal advisory unit that helps the board in terms of multiculturalism at work. And the colleague just emailed, said, I didn't know anything about Ramadan. That was very helpful. Thank you so much. And so, look, any question, ask me. Even if you think that could be discriminative or whatever. Again, it depends on who you ask, because we're not here to be your Google. But if it's, you need to ask, and I do that all the time. Even in account and stuff, maybe it's not right to do, but I'll go into ethnicity conversations because I love it. It's just like you learn so much about people. It's like traveling. You learn a lot from traveling, right? Why would you not want to learn about cultures of other people, or even when it goes into other aspects of diversity? It's just I don't know. Yeah, it's a good thing to do and ask as well.
Constant learning is key, and it's certainly one of the things that I've taken from our conversation today, and I know many others tuning in will have learnt a huge amount about this podcast and about all aspects of intersectionality, media, data. Serhat, I shall do my very best to summarise, but I think where we start when it comes to
all directions, isn't it?
But all good, because that's the great thing about conversation. I mean, we've covered so much, the importance of media representation, the importance of content, of communications, of data. the background that you have is, you know, Turkish, Kurdish, you know, your wife, your children, you know, everyone who is listening has a story and has different visible and invisible differences. And so when listening to the work that you do, that not only is meaningful and impactful, why would anyone not want to see individuals, people, cultures that represent them in the products and the surfaces in which they are purchasing every day on our screens, in our media? It is absolutely critical. One of the other things that really stood out for me, and I hope did for everyone else as well, is the conscious inclusion piece. And you said, you know, content should be relevant to all. And this is something that we're now really starting to see as an upward trend and an upward tick. I really like the phrase, we've gone from being beggars to choosers. This is something that is such a business imperative for brands to really sit up now and take notice to, but for all of the right reasons. So I'll say thank you, Serhat, so much. It's been a real joy to chat to you one-on-one, and I'm already thinking we should be doing part 2 and talk about many other things. There's, you know, we've covered the broad spectrum from internal to external to personal to intersectionality. It's been superb. My name is Leila McKenzie-Delis, and you've been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast with the fantastic Serhat Ekinci of OMG and Unite. If you've been affected by anything in today's show, please don't be a stranger. If you would like to tune in, you can do so on Apple Podcasts, on your favorite podcast app. We're on a number of the different podcasts, and you can also check us out online or in the Dial Global app on the App Store. Or if you need any specific ways to consume the content, do let us know, because the team will be more than happy to give annotations and transcripts as well. Visit us at www.dialglobal.org/podcast, and we shall look forward to seeing you very soon.